Good day. Welcome to the session with Professor Emeritus Stephen Adei. We continue our theme on leadership for everyone, everywhere. Last week, I gave an overview of organizational leadership. I shared that during the sessions, we'll be talking about leading organizations generally, where we'll be looking at the role of vision, mission, strategies, and what really leadership entails. Then we'll look at leadership styles or approaches of leadership, their strengths and their weaknesses generally. We will then look at organizational culture and how important it is in determining outcomes and outputs, and the challenge of changing organizational culture and behavior if you discover dysfunctionalities, or even if they are normal, how to improve it and the challenges that the leader faces in doing so. At the bottom of all leadership, and particularly so in organizations, is decision making. And the leader at the top, as President Truman would say, the buck stops with me. Any leader who is not prepared to take the hard decisions about changing product mix or about hiring or firing dysfunctional and non-performing workers is not going to be an effective leader. And finally, one of the characteristics about organization is that there are teams, whether you call it departments, accounting, production, whatever. The people work in teams. And therefore, leading organizations also entails catalyzing functional teams. However, before I dig into any of these aspects of organizational leadership, I want to do two things which more or less continues what we started last session. And my topic for today is the personality and character of the leader, or authentic leadership in organizational setting. Authentic leadership in organizational session. And I'm trusting that this will set the stage for the subsequent ones. Let me say that in organization, more than anywhere else, people are likely to confuse the functions of leadership and position of leadership. And oftentimes, the people who are at the top are automatically described as leaders. And if we fail to understand the nuantic difference between leadership and management at the organizational level, we will not make headway. Since general manager, CEO are the top management, let me start with what management often entails and why, even at its best, it's short of effective leadership. Normally, the leaders, or rather the managers, will be responsible for recruiting personnel, that's normal, and overseeing the human resources, planning. Normally, for 1 year, there will be budgets. 3 years, you may have the business plan, and often they will have a strategic plan for 5 years. But this by itself will be implementation of long-term leadership decisions and visions, and they themselves do not constitute full-orbed leadership. They also make progress. I mean, when budgets are made, we want to increase output by 10%, profitability by 15%. So they don't work in a very same situation. There is some changes over time. However, they tend to be what I call incremental change, projecting from the historic past and not really causing any earth-shaking decisions. There will be no paradigm shift. And the critical element of management is that they operate within a certain sphere. In other words, the status quo, in fact, they are the guardians of the status quo, the rules and the performance management system and the rest. And therefore, even good managers can be a bottleneck when one wants to really cause a paradigm shift. Therefore, management is important, but it is not sufficient to describe the leadership I am talking about. Again, position gives you a wider scope to lead if you have the leadership skills, but by itself does not make one a leader. In fact, many organizations can talk about the CEO or the general manager being more of a dog in a manger rather than being a catalyst of paradigm shifts. So position allows you to lead on a bigger scale, but by itself does not constitute leadership. Even authority, which is what I call the currency of leaders, does not necessarily make you a leader. Let me use a very laughable illustration, but I hope it will send it home to all of us. When I'm driving my car, whether it's a four-wheel or a Benz, and a police constable raises his hand, as a law-abiding citizen, what should I do? I must stop. Why? Because he has authority. He has the authority of the state to stop me, and if I don't stop, I may sleep where I don't want to sleep. Because next time I may be arrested, I will be put in the front of a young boy or a young lady whom they call, a newly appointed judge, and his or her decision is final. I may end up, if I resist, I may end up in jail by just the statement of a young person who may be younger than any of my children. Why? Because they have authority of the state behind them. But for goodness sake, is the police constable my leader? Is the judge my leader? He may be, probably in my church, he may be an elder, but ordinarily, I don't consider him as a leader. He has the authority. And many people, when they are appointed into position, especially, we'll come back to that later, to political position, then immediately they think that they are leaders commanding people left and right. And most of them, sadly, make a mess of the situation, and they discourage many people who are working under them. I'm not saying that a leader does not need to have a position or authority. What I'm saying that these are necessary but not sufficient conditions to describe a leader. In fact, when we come to leadership styles, we will describe one which we normally call servant leaders. Oftentimes, servant leaders will have no position, no title, but of great influence. In the work of, in the literatures, for example, there is Greenleaf describes the story of people who went to go to Burma. They were going to the Buddhist temples, and oftentimes one of the Buddhist priests will be the one that will lead people to the place. You will come to the below the mountain. They are up there in the Buddha and the temple, and they call him Leo. And of course, being they take him to be a tall guy, hey, Leo, can I get some water? This and that and that. And they will do all, he will guide them to the temple. But before they get there, when he points it to them, he vanishes. And of course, he goes and changes. He is actually the priest they are going to see. This is a servant leader who guided many people to come and meet him. Jesus Christ is the world's greatest servant leader. He had no post. He was neither a Pharisee, a Sadducee, or a scribe. But today, his followers constitute the single religious body in the world. Mahatma Gandhi, non-violence, strong within, but not harsh or shouting. And he drove away the British from India. And therefore, position, power, authority are good. When you have leadership skills, they will enhance your leadership. But by themselves, do not constitute leadership. One of my best loved statements about leadership, what leadership is by John Cotter. And Cotter, J.P. Cotter is a Harvard professor, one of the leading authorities on leadership. And he says leadership has to do with prescribing a vision, a clear vision of the future, and I'm paraphrasing him, and leading to elaborate the strategies to implement the vision, and mobilizing followers, that's being managers, workers, to make the vision happen. And I like what he adds to it, despite obstacles. In other words, what we are talking about is not a matter of a position. The position of a CEO, the position of managing director gives you, of course, the authority and the power, the command over resources to hire and fire. However, if you have not acquired what it takes to lead, in fact, you frustrate people and the outcomes are not sufficient. So the first thing I want to say is that we must be very careful when we are talking about organizational leadership. We are not talking about the person at the top. Of course, he is classically a leader, but we are talking about leadership as a function. Leadership is influencing people to achieve a given goal or objective or vision. And as you often will find, it's not a matter of theoretically saying that let's move from A to B. That is dreaming, and a dream, of course, is important. But to become a leadership catalyst, you must not only have a clear picture of the future, but also the stages to get there and the ability to mobilize followers or workers or other people to focus on that and make it happen despite obstacles. The last thing I would like to do, again in this sequel to the introduction, is that in so doing, who the leader is matters. There's a whole series of literature called authentic leadership. or leadership with integrity. What I want to focus on today is the fact that who is at the helm of affairs is very important. Recently, I was speaking to a group, and my research indicated that the leader's behavior, the one in the leadership position, their behavior alone constitutes 50% of the work climate of an organization. Wow. And you are talking of some organizations, if it's multinational, they will have probably tens of thousands. In my own organization, there are more than 340. How come that one person's behavior accounts for 50% of the organizational climate? Even though we are not talking about the political leadership now, which will be a different session, my listeners who are Ghanaians know that there has been a political leadership change a year and a few months ago. And for better, for worse, I'm not making judgment, but the leadership outcomes of the second term of Akufo-Addo and of the few months of Mahama are like day and night. Of course, I'm not here to judge because we saw some also fantastic achievements in the first 2 years of Akufo-Addo. I can only wish Mahama well, that it will not be a 9-day wonder, because if the politicians let us down again, then we are going to be in big trouble. But this, I'm just saying this to illustrate that a leader, even at the national level, leadership change makes a lot of difference. We are experiencing the leadership change in America. Again, not being judgmental, but Biden and Trump are totally different people with different impact. What is true at the national level is even more so at the organizational level. Why? Because the distances are quite close. In other words, hey, if the head of state does something, eventually it will go through certain filters before it reaches me. But if I'm a head of department and my CEO becomes dysfunctional, Charlie, boom, straight away. Therefore, it is important that anybody in a leadership situation does not consider themselves as just one of us. Yes, you are not supposed to go about, do you know me? No, but you must know that your decision, your behavior, and your character matters to the whole organization. I was talking to some young people in executive position, and I said that, do you know that if you have to take a decision and people are going to act on that decision, and then you delay it by 1 day, what you are doing is that if there are 1,000 people under you, you are actually causing 1,000 days delay because you did not take the decision and everyone was waiting for you. That is how powerful a leadership action is. When a leader is therefore not authentic, credible, trustworthy, the impact becomes gargantuan. There was a study in the United States of 1,500 corporate leaders, and they were asked, what is the single most important virtue that is they are looking for in a leader? And do you know the answer? The answer was credibility. Should I repeat it? Credibility. Trustworthiness. In other words, they are looking for someone at the top whose words can be trusted. We are not talking about a church. We are not talking about people having crusade on moral rearmament. We are talking about top corporations, and this is what followers are looking for in terms of who is at the top, that they are credible. Let me try to summarize what I've been trying to say is this. We are talking about leadership as a function, not as power, and we'll talk about how to use leadership power in an organization, authority, or position. These are important catalysts, and the higher you go, the greater the scope for your leadership. But that by itself does not make you a leader. A good manager may not necessarily be also a good leader, because oftentimes the manager is the custodian of the status quo and he operates within the given system, while true leadership want to transform and push the borders, innovate, get us to a higher vision. And we would therefore be looking at leadership as a function. And the other point I've been talking about is that when it comes to leadership in an organization, the man or woman at the top must know their behavior. It's so important that it has been estimated that it accounts for 50% of organizational climate in most cases. Of course, it will be less in a civil service with rule-based, but even then, the scope to make a difference when you have a leader who is authentic makes a difference. In conclusion, let me say that who you are matters, and especially your credibility, your competence, and the trust that people repose upon you, in you, will make a difference. Who you are, your leadership outcomes, and your impact on them. Next week, I will be looking specifically at the critical functions of leadership in elaborating a vision. The second is developing strategies that will support the vision and mobilizing people so that you achieve the organizational vision. And that is the beginning of true leadership in any organization. I wish you that the best during the week, and that you will join me again as we look at leadership in organizations. Please always, you can meet me on ZFM 101.9, ZFM 101.9. And if you miss that one, please don't forget to check me on Emeritus Professor Stephen Adei on YouTube. Shalom.